All right. Hello, everyone. Welcome to LA Blockchain Summit. We are very excited to share this panel with you regarding real-world blockchain use cases. This is easily a panel that could extend through the entire conference if we had allocated enough time for it. But that said, we're going to keep it very high level and give you as much information in as little time possible in this 27 minutes. With me, I have a very diverse group of individuals who are both have corporate experience as well as just very niche blockchain experience in a number of different verticals. So that said, you're going to get a lot of information out of this panel. I'm sure of that. And we'll be able to speak much more beyond that of just Bitcoin and other things that most people are aware of what blockchain can do. So that said, we'll start with some quick introductions and then get quick into content. My name is Jared Winn. I'm the founder of Winn Solutions and a blockchain philanthropist. Formerly, I was a vice president at Binance in their charity sector. I focus on, at this point, marketing and public relations, as well as helping to frame the messaging behind blockchain products and blockchain solutions. And very excited to be moderating this panel for everybody here today. Halsey, I'll hand over to you.
Hi, I run, I'm in charge of the Video Coin Network. I'm the CEO of Live Planet, and we're directly responsible for building the Video Coin Network.
Great. Maya?
Hi, I'm Maya Vujinovic. I run OGroup. I've been in the space since 2010. Was a former CIO at General Electric and a catalyst for General Electric using blockchain across all the business verticals.
Wonderful. Ciaran.
Hi, Jared. Ciaran McGowan here from We.trade in Dublin, Ireland. And we effectively provide liquidity, cash flow enhancement for merchants. 15 banks live on the We.trade platform at the moment. And really, we're giving access to those merchants for bank guarantees, invoice financing, credit insurance. Really, it's all about cash flow, really, Jared. Previously, I worked in various technology companies in Ireland, Eon Tech, Phineas, and Retail Emotion, among others.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. Haroun.
Yeah, I'm Haroun, co-founder and CEO of Epilert, a startup working on medical technology. We're trying to detect and monitor epilepsy seizures and put the whole data sets on a blockchain. And I've previously worked on a fintech startup.
Great. Thank you so much. And lastly, David.
Hi, David Post. I'm the managing director for Trust Your Supplier. It's a joint initiative between IBM and Chainyard, and it's a network-based approach to supplier onboarding and validation, building a decentralized corporate identity for the first time. We have about 30 plus Fortune 500 companies signed up, and I'm having fun with it. Thanks for having me.
Wonderful. Thanks for being here, and thank you everyone for being here. So as a quick high level, when people think of blockchain, they typically correlate with Bitcoin. Bitcoin was one of the first use cases that we were all able to witness of blockchain, which was a kind of a revolutionary technology for us to think, how can this otherwise be used? Many people today still don't understand how blockchain works, and it took me some time in myself to actually understand it fully. But essentially, think of blockchain as the removal of trust between a transaction. Typically, for transactions to occur from one point to another, there has to be a middleman or a human interaction. And with human interaction, you get variability. You never know how a human's going to behave in one way or another. And with that, trust and reputation is what comes behind major brands such as MasterCard, American Express, Visa, the major companies that we trust to transfer our funds from point A to point B. Now, there is a better way to do this, and that's why we're all here, and that's called blockchain, in which code does not ever falter. It doesn't behave in one way or the other based on a gain or a loss. It will always act the way that we instruct it to, which leads us to artificial intelligence, leads us to many different use cases for blockchain in itself. What I'd like to do is kind of start with Halsey to talk about how blockchain actually really can benefit, or how the video industry of all things can benefit from blockchain. Now, with blockchain specifically, latency is a big issue. The amount of time that it takes for one thing to happen. Video is very high demand. So Halsey, I'm very interested to hear, how can that industry benefit from integrating blockchain into the infrastructure?
Well, it's interesting. In one way, we do exactly what Bitcoin does. So what's amazing about Bitcoin is, without anybody asking anybody to go out and buy hardware and set it up and process transactions and get paid, there was this massive network, probably the largest computational network ever in the entire world, was built without one person being asked to do anything. So what we do is we borrow that idea and we take advantage of the 30 to 40% of servers that today are sitting in data centers doing nothing because they've already uploaded their data center basically to the cloud. And that means that they've got tens of billions of dollars in servers that are doing nothing. And so what we do is we use those servers in the same way that Amazon uses the servers they buy to process video. So by using servers that people have that they're not using and they're willing to get some money versus nothing, we can lower the overall cost of processing video, which obviously in this environment is incredibly important because there's a explosion going on in video if people haven't noticed.
Absolutely. And I have some background in video analytics, and I know the intensity that it requires in terms of GPU processing and everything that comes with it. And with that, there's a big apprehension to use cloud when it comes to that. Do you feel that cloud in itself is broken in that way? And do you think that blockchain can improve upon it?
No, I was actually the co-founder of Salesforce.com and spent a good part of my time helping to build that. And I think cloud is very good for certain kinds of things. I think what's important now is as we go into a 5G world, 5G is all about very low latency. And so that means that all of the hardware needs to get pushed towards the edge. So the cloud was very successful at reducing cost and complexity. But now that we have 5G and we need low latency, it's all going to flip on itself. It always is. Computing always goes, consolidated, decentralized, consolidated. So 5G is the architecture that we built for VideoCoin is pretty much how all applications are going to be built going forward if they want to take advantage of 5G's low latency capability, which is a big part of what 5G is.
Yes. And just to add to that for everybody, 5G being the 5th generation of wireless technology is going to essentially revolutionize the way that we do things now. Right now with cellular technology, you'll get anywhere from 30 milliseconds up to even 300 milliseconds on the transfer of data from one to another. I saw at one point somebody trying to play virtual reality with a soccer helmet, and they weren't able to do it on current cell phone technology because the soccer ball would fly past them and they couldn't block it. On 5G, they could, because the amount of distance between the cell tower and the user itself is shortened, as well as the fiber optic layout that's kind of the backbone behind it. So 5G and blockchain in itself, it's going to be kind of the pinnacle is what we're reaching, this technological revolution. So do you see any other ways that 5G will impact blockchain? Halsey.
Oh, for me?
Yes.
Specifically? Oh, I think they are completely complementary technologies because I don't really know any other way that you can get the decentralization of hardware that's necessary for 5G. There's no, all of the development for the last 15 years has been putting stuff in bigger and bigger clouds, and now we have to completely reverse that. And the technology to reverse that is blockchain, because blockchain is designed to be distributed. The only problem is just the speed at which the blockchain needs to operate, and the way you need to set your blockchain up so that it's very, very low latency, and that requires things like staking and other complicated thoughts. But blockchain and 5G are pals. They're joined at the hip.
Yes, I completely agree. Well, thank you so much for that, Halsey. And I think I'm very excited to see how that continues to progress with your project. And I'd like to do a little bit of a pivot here. And Ciaran, you specifically have done a significant amount of work more relevant to COVID-19, and we've all experienced the different impacts that this has had on us financially. I myself, owning 2 businesses, the PPP loan process in the United States was absolutely egregious. It took me 2-3 months to receive funding in a situation that many weren't able to wait. Many people lost their businesses as a result of these delays. So I'm curious, based on your practice and your expertise, How did Europe do with this process? Firstly, let's talk about that with regards to this fund distribution, and in what ways do you think blockchain could have improved upon it?
Yeah, I think we had similar problems in Europe, Jared. If you think about businesses, they were under severe pressure, having to lay off staff, having just not able to pay bills, and they needed support, and they needed support fast. And a lot of processes were very manual, just took too long, and companies went under because they didn't have sufficient support to keep them alive. And I think in a blockchain scenario, if you had all of the relevant parties together on a blockchain, so if you think of the PPP you've just mentioned there, you've got the small businesses, you've got the US Small Business Administration, you have the banks, the revenue, and maybe other government bodies. I think the key thing around the blockchain is a consensus mechanism so that all of those parties could agree on the conditions to really support those businesses. So if you think of the PPP, it was really about giving loans to those businesses, giving them in a fast and efficient way. It's a 1% rate that was applied. The blockchain would control whether it would be a 2-year term or 5-year term, managing the deferrals, and really just setting out the conditions for forgiveness, because that's really what it was all about, that these loans were applied, and companies who are maintaining their employees or quickly rehiring their employees, they were able to get forgiveness for those loans. So really the validation and using a smart contract scenario to make sure that the proof was provided either through tax returns or sort of receipts for employment tax. So that mechanism, if it was in place in a blockchain environment, could have really solved that problem, because it's all about bringing those, what you say, digital islands together, bringing all of those people together, and the proper mechanism and consensus facility really to bring the speedy as loan facilities to those businesses that were needed. A speed, and also then the immutability of the records, and then analytics and tracking, things like which businesses were able to survive through those loans being provided, and the analytics to know how better to do it again in the future. So it would have been a perfect scenario for blockchain.
I completely agree. And with that, it's needless to say that we were not prepared medically, financially, whatsoever for this pandemic. But that said, there could have been a much smoother path. And I think that that's going to be realized through this process, was that things could have been better. Things could have been done better. And prior to this pandemic, I was actually working hand in hand with the Carolinas with respect to trying to implement something for FEMA relief. They had just encountered Dorian, where there had been a long period of 3 months where there weren't any funds distributed for the rebuilding of these houses and homes that had otherwise been destroyed. Whereas a blockchain transaction can take seconds to minutes. So there's definitely opportunity on the horizon. It's just a matter of how do we get this to be leveraged? And with that, I'd like to hand off to Maya, who had former experience with General Electric. Maya, I'd love to hear a little bit about how you were able to incorporate blockchain into day-to-day and what you had to do to get some of that buy-in at such a large corporation.
Yeah, that's a good one. It was in 2014 when that started in 15, so it's really early for the corporates. But as I said, I've been involved in it since the beginning. It was part of really early projects and some of the stable coins in the space. It wasn't an easy buy-in, right? They equated Bitcoin to blockchain, right? So if you talked about blockchain, they thought that it was a Bitcoin and there's no purpose to it, right? So it took a little bit, but what was interesting is actually going back to Halsey's point, really interesting in terms of computing power. One of the crazy ideas I had that got me in front of FAA was to use the airline engine energy, right? So as GEs of the world produce these airline engines, you produce a lot of electricity, right? So that electricity, I asked to the CEO of aviation, what do you do with the electricity? And he said, well, we ground it. And so we don't use it for anything. And that is massive amounts of electricity can power like New York City. So I turned around and we created a project that actually, I had a suggestion to attach blockchain and Bitcoin machines and really pay for the whole division. And the only reason it didn't pass is because it was really early on, and we really could have powered most of the business divisions by just using the electricity that we produce on those. So going back to some unused assets and unused power. And I will never forget this, right? I mean, being a woman, bunch of, 50-year-olds sitting in front of me in 2015, and I'm telling them to attach a machine to and mine Bitcoin, and to really pay for a failing division. That division was failing. And it didn't pass by a general counsel because Bitcoin was considered to be a naughty transaction where you buy guns and porn and other things, right?
So the stigma was against you in that.
That's right. So I think that part was quite interesting. I've learned a lot. And that's actually met Bitfury and really early on. But really what happened later on, 6 months later, is we've devised a number of different cases. And so attestation of devices, energy use cases, aviation. And by the way, talk about COVID. Last year, I believe, application went live on Microsoft Azure and GE on traceability of foods and airline business and safety. So that is, I think it's called T-Food. You can Google it, and it is live. Reality is also twofold, right? That a lot of the data that's in these corporates is extremely polluted and not clean. And so it takes a while to get it into cloud and transition of that and cleanliness of data and really figuring out what the next business models will be, right? For some of these areas in the world and some of the customers. And then really combining it with artificial intelligence and blockchain, right? Otherwise, it's very expensive and it's inefficient, and there are just really great databases you can use without using a blockchain, and you can solve it. Now, as we go into 5G and other things, and as things become more digitized, I think it becomes a really interesting race who's going to have a super highway that, that is a blockchain that will be able to, compute everything else that we need. So, but I could talk about different use cases that, and to this day, GE is using it in aviation, in energy, in IoT, trade finance. That was another project that we did with JP Morgan. So yeah.
It's very interesting that you mentioned a lot of that, and it's always a battle. I mean, the reason that we're here at this conference today for a lot of us is learning, and I think that the battle for blockchain adoption will be based on education. And to educate, you have to have those ambassadors, the people that will be able to help people to understand. And 2014 was definitely a bit early. There wasn't enough to really be of a foundation, and people would think Bitcoin, isn't that what people lost houses? Isn't that what people use on the dark web? So on and so forth. And I remember speaking to Anthony Pompliano actually about this, in which he actually had a business that was for recycling of tires or rubber products. And he used the byproduct, the aftermath, that energy, to mine Bitcoin. So it was a very similar basis where it was like, how do we make profit, or how do we essentially recuperate some of these costs associated with this process? So I think that
Jared, and actually that just reminds me of one of the things that I think is very useful is fraud and 3D printing. Right, that's where it's really, really useful, because you have a lot of cyber attacks in these companies that are producing materials through 3D printers and for designs, and that comes unfortunately out of Asia a lot. And blockchain is a very, very good use case for that. Excellent use case. I forgot about that. Sorry.
No, that's a very good one, and it brings up another topic in which it kind of follows the process of supply chains when it comes to blockchain. Is when you have many hands in the process of the manufacturing all the way through the delivery and distribution of a product, there is a lot of opportunity for corruption. And with that, there can be opportunities for swaps and counterfeits and bribes, and people will lie at times to, of course, get the better or the upper hand. Haroun, I believe that you actually have some focus on this as well, with what you've done in medicine. With your practice and what you've done, how have you leveraged blockchain in the medicine field specifically?
Yeah, so basically, I believe that blockchain in general is a very great way to deregulating government, to make governance even better. And the idea of having a third impartial party seems very right. Whether it's in finance, in the medical field, having a third impartial party that we call it blockchain take care of stuff that government usually over-regulate, just like medical data, which is something that makes sense, because after all, we don't want our medical data somewhere that is suspicious. So basically, we're trying to implement a blockchain database that is trustworthy in order to store the basically the patient's data. So basically, we do bracelets for epilepsy detection and monitoring. We have 5 biosensors in addition to data logged by the patient. So it's a very sensitive data. The idea is, as we work with governments, we want to prove to them that it's necessary that things like GDPR are implemented roughly and killing small business, because I mean, to comply, you need plenty of money, right? So the idea is going with blockchain in finance or in the medical field, or even in smart contract, to having less regulation and corruptible processes is a very interesting thing. And that's the idea, basically. That's the revolution behind Bitcoin and blockchain, making governance faster, making less regulation but better governance. That's the whole idea behind this revolution, I think.
I agree. And data privacy, as you touched on, is such a chief concern, especially in today's situation of this pandemic, is that people want privacy and they want ownership over the data that they have, especially when it comes to their medical records. What you were saying with your those bracelets and whatnot, also a perfect use case for is why 5G is necessary. You do not want to delay when it comes to having epilepsy of any kind. You need to have that prompt and quick in order to have a quick response time. And there's a number of corporations that we know today that are incorporating blockchain use cases. Microsoft is one of them, IBM being another. David, you have almost a decade worth of experience with IBM, and we were talking about supply chains and basically how blockchain complements that to ensure the seamless transfer and the trustworthy transfer of goods along a process. I'd love to hear a little bit more about how you incorporated blockchain into your day-to-day, and maybe some use cases that you had with your job.
Yeah, I mean, blockchain has been my day-to-day for the past couple of years, so that's been pretty fun. And as I mentioned at the outset, the use case that I've been most focused on is kind of in the realm of digital corporate identity. So you were talking about your experiences during the early days of COVID. We noticed the same thing in the PPE space. So essentially, it was a very messed up market. If you're trying to buy a mask or buy gloves or buy hand sanitizer, there was kind of bad actors on both the supply and the demand side of the fence, which is extremely unusual in the context of any well-functioning market. So this was probably the worst functioning market I've ever seen. And part of the problem was that the process by which organizations qualify and identify suppliers is really point to point. So it takes place somewhere in the ether. I use the analogy. Everyone needs the same information, but it's like if you had to get a new driver's license every time you cross a state boundary. They want your picture, they want your basic identity information. This is by and large the case in kind of corporate procurement divisions. So throughout COVID, you had lots of bad suppliers all being qualified and hopefully weeded out by companies basically doing a repetitive process over and over again. So our thesis with Trust Your Supplier, and this is kind of why we spun up a COVID-specific instance during that time, is that it's much more efficient for all parties involved if there's one place where you can go to access identity information. So for Trust Your Supplier, it's a very powerful, very interesting use case. It's good for suppliers. They have all their information in one place. They can permission that data to any buyer on the network. On the flip side, buyers of large Fortune 500 buyers specifically have set up large, elaborate structures to process compliance information, but they can access that just like a LinkedIn invitation at the click of a button. So by basically, I think if you look at the building blocks of Web 3.0, it's going to be identity and payments. In order to have companies be able to seamlessly transact, and including decentralized use cases, there has to be a credible source of identity that can be pinged via APIs. And while our initial use case is around supplier onboarding and validation, when we're successful, I think this will be the corporate identity standard. And you can use your imagination. Anyone who's in the blockchain space, there's a lot of cool things that can happen once you have a trusted source of identity or a digital passport that's portable across time and space.
So with that use case specifically, what would you say the main I guess, complement of blockchain was? Was it the immutability, the fact that there was no third-party ownership of the data, or that the process of onboarding was embedded in code? What would you feel was really why blockchain in that versus a centralized database?
I think everybody talks about immutability and security when they talk about blockchain, but I think one of the underemphasized points is the business process automation component. So I would say that the reason why we built this on blockchain is not so much for the initial use case, which could be done with a centralized database, but it's more for subsequent use cases. So if you think about a situation where companies are all contracting out with third-party validators to basically conduct the same assessment, if you talk about a manufacturer with tier 3 or tier 4 suppliers in that value chain, you could basically, if you're a company in this type of a trust your supplier world, you could specify other companies and other validators that you trust. And then once that validation activity happens, you don't need to know who conducted the validation. All you need to do, which company did it, all you need to know that it had happened. So that greatly improves processes. If you're trying to do business with a new company, if you're trying to look at a supply chain risk, a network is much more inherently attractive way and efficient way to transact than a point-to-point basis. That's why we see Uber and Airbnb and eBay. These are networks. So the advantages here is once you're able to establish that underlying source of identity, you can then automate a lot of business processes on top of it. And that really, I think, speaks to how Web 3.0 will be enabled. You have to have a degree of automation. And the only way that you can really do that is if you're sure that transactions happened, even if you're not sure who actually did those transactions. So I think that's the advantage of blockchain, and you're kind of building for the long run here. Of course, there's time and cost savings by the fact that there is an idea, like an identity on the blockchain that's immutable. But I think that the fun stuff happens after you're able to kind of set that identity standard. In the short term, will obviously generate a lot of business value for our clients. But I think that's the prize here, and it's much easier to aggregate identities in the corporate world than in the consumer world, quite frankly, because there's less companies than there are people. And if you sign them up once, you've got a large amount of data and information and transaction volume. So that's why I'm particularly excited about this. You can envision a future where We.trade is plugging into this, as are other blockchain networks that have a need for identity, and that can happen in the context of distributed applications as well. So I think that's the cool thing here, and that's why I'm pretty excited about this project.
Well, when we have giants like IBM that are essentially spearheading this, it only adds more confidence that we're in the right place. And David, that was extremely enlightening. I learned a lot just from the few minutes that you spoke there. And yes, that was very enlightening. So that said, we are out of time at this point. I wanted to thank everybody once again for listening to us and real world use cases for blockchain. And thank you again for attending LA Blockchain Summit.